challenge, but it will be done at the grassroots, not the top down.
All right, let's talk to Andrew Leigh now. He's the Labor member for the federal seat of Fraser in the ACT. As an academic at the Australian National University, he published research 2 years ago which found John Howard's gun buyback worked by dramatically cutting the number of deaths by firearms. He believes lives would also be saved in the US if fewer households owned guns. Andrew Leigh joins us now in Canberra. Andrew, welcome back to The Drum.
Thanks, Steve.
What could President Obama learn from John Howard when it comes to gun law reform?
Well, Steve, I think that moment in which John Howard and Tim Fischer took on their own Conservative constituencies and said, look, this has to happen, is really something that needs to happen in the United States. And so it's up to really congressional Republicans to recognise that that they can stand up to their base. And there's another path for the National Rifle Association too. It hasn't always been this kind of radical from my cold dead hands organisation. Charlton Heston and other extremists took it over. And it is actually possible for moderates to take back the National Rifle Association, to say that sensible gun control and hunting and sporting shooting sit comfortably side by side. When on my optimistic days, that's my hope for US gun control.
So your study a couple of years ago, what did you learn about how the buyback worked in Australia?
Well, Christine Neal and I found a number of things. First of all, there's been no mass shootings since the Port Arthur massacre. Up until then, we'd been seeing about one a year, and that's not luck. That's the policy working. But then we also found about 200 lives saved every year. Some of those gun homicides, but more gun suicides. And I don't think that's something people expected when the law was put into place, that actually the benefit of the gun buyback was that we halved the share of gun-owning households from 15% to 8%, and that meant that when a teenager was depressed or when spouses' debates turned to violence, that there wasn't a weapon in the house that they could use to fatal effect.
Andrew, the Australian example, back in 1996, I think there was about 3 million guns in Australia. In the US at the moment, they've got around 300 million. I mean, how would a buyback work in a country where there is such scale of weapons in the country?
It is huge, Steve, but the challenge is really to increase the share of households in the US that don't have guns. So if you were to do the same as you did in Australia and take out about a fifth of the gun stock in the US, that'd be about 60 million weapons in the US. So they cost $500 each, then that would be in the order of $30 billion. The research that Christine Neal and I did suggests that would be $30 billion pretty well spent, would save an awful lot of lives of young Americans.
Imre?
Andrew, all credit, as you say, to John Howard and the premiers from both sides of politics who, as you say, convinced or stared down a conservative, predominantly rural constituency in the changes that were made. But isn't it the fact that there was nothing in Australia to compare with the really broad-based public belief in the freedom to bear arms that we see in the United States? What I'm saying is the polling doesn't show any broad-based support for these changes. How does Obama confront that? I mean, in Australia, we just don't have that culture.
Imre, I'd certainly take your point there, and I think the challenge is to build up, in some sense, a base of moderate gun owners. I went out to a rifle range in my own electorate a couple of weeks ago, and there was out with sporting shooters who were strong supporters of sensible gun controls. Some of the members in the pistol clubs say, you know, the last thing they want is to have a pistol in their home. They're glad that the pistols are locked up in the pistol club because it makes them sleep better at night. So it's how you sort of manage to inculcate that sense that you can be proud of your sporting shooting without needing to campaign for the right to carry an AK-47.
Andrew, the buyback was just one part of John Howard's policy. He also banned automatic and semi-automatic weapons. Was there any way that you could measure what impact that had on deaths from guns in Australia?
Well, it all does come together, as you say, Steve, and I guess that's the key to it. There's been US cities that have tried their own buyback programs, and they've been pretty unsuccessful. In fact, at their worst, a city-based buyback program just allows the crooks to upgrade their arsenal. The key in Australia was to have those sensible gun controls alongside the gun buyback. And strikingly, most of the guns bought back weren't semi-autos, they were simple 22s, the weapon most commonly used in shootings in Australia. And it's a matter of getting that first gun out of the households. It'd be so terrific if the United States could do that, a country which every day loses 25 people to gun homicides and 45 people to gun suicides.
Andrew, just finally, what about the argument that you hear from the gun lobby that if law-abiding citizens have guns in their hands, it's a deterrent to gun crime?
It's certainly true that once in a while a law-abiding citizen manages to avert a crime by carrying a gun. But if you look at the statistics, places with more guns tend to have more gun crime. And you only have to recognise that the person most likely to kill you with a gun is yourself, closely followed by your spouse. And so they're the key categories of gun deaths that we can reduce by reducing the gun ownership rate. These mass shootings spur reform, but they're actually a really small share of all the total gun deaths.
Andrew Leigh, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, folks.